For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from Cape Town, South Africa. Good morning, Michael.
Morning. A bit of a slowdown, really, yesterday. Asia trading slightly lower this morning. Worries about the hawkishness of the United States, the hawkishness of what the Fed was saying. Also, retail sales disappointing in the United States as well. The Hang Seng up very, very marginally, but the Shanghai Composite down similarly very, very marginally. So basically fairly flat. It's the second day of China's annual economic work conference, which apparently has taken place behind closed doors. We'll get some idea of what they plan for their growth forecasts when they actually emerge from those closed doors. China's chip makers, secondly, are suffering US restrictions, even more on the so-called US entity list, which they're being excluded from for national security worries. This is basically in the areas of semiconductors, and we're talking about the Chinese military, we're talking about technologies, we're talking about AA, and we're talking about advanced computing. So in all those kind of areas, if anything is being seen by or being thought by the US authorities to help the China military, then it's being stopped from exporting. And China itself experiencing a slight sort of reopening. They're very, very worried about that, though. A lot of people are thinking there's going to be new challenges, and infections are in fact soaring as a result of this opening. So the COVID not over in China yet. Let's turn our attention to the United States, and stock futures fairly flat, really. Wednesday's sell-off continued in normal trading. The Dow shed 764 points. I've talked already about those disappointing retail sales. And the Fed lifting interest rates to the highest level in 15 years. It's still relatively hawkish in its outlook. We're going to hear from various Fed speakers again today, and we may get some idea of what they think about the economy as far as the United States is concerned. The EU, very aggressive again. The European Central Bank raising interest rates by 0.5% from 1.5% to 2%. The ECB and Ursula von der Leyen saying we want to reduce the balance sheet by $15 billion a month. We are not pivoting, she says. We have longer to go. And she doesn't expect inflation, or at least the ECB doesn't expect inflation to fall below 2.3% by 2025. Remember, the ECB's target is 2%, so it's still a long way off. As far as the Bank of England is concerned, raising rates to the highest in 14 years yesterday, up as expected, another 0.5%. Further tightening likely. A lot of people thought this was very dovish. I didn't think it was dovish at all. I think that two people on the Monetary Policy Committee did not agree with what was being said. But I think if you add wary consumers to that, and so on, then again, not a great deal of future out of the recession for the UK economy. And there's some bright news from the City. Intercontinental exchange called ICE could be moving from Amsterdam to London after the gas price cap. They're the biggest gas traders in the world. As far as oil's concerned, general worries about recession pulling crude prices slightly lower. Stronger the dollar, the weaker the oil price, basically, and global recession risks still hanging over the oil market. That's the global view this morning.
All right, real quickly, Michael. I still keep looking at the oil market. Amidst global recession fears, what should we be, really afraid of at this point in time? Global recession fears, should we be afraid that there's going to be slowdown in the uptake of oil? And how would that impact economies like us?
Well, I mean, the crude price is falling. You've seen it. I mean, I've talked about it earlier this week as being in this range between $70 and $80 a barrel. It looks as though it could drop below that. And it's all basically about the worries about global recession. And it could be that because oil, after all, is just a commodity, and if people don't want to use it, then they don't buy it. And if there's a global recession, people will use less. We still don't really know China is. We don't know the effect of what's happening with the Ukraine war. We don't have to Russian oil exports and so on. There's a whole load of uncertainties. But from volatility, I think we've moved into an area of pessimism. And I suspect that will probably last until we get some further indications, particularly from OPEC Plus, for example, which is apparently telling us something that you and I both know extremely well. good heavens, the oil market is very volatile. I think we knew that to start with.
All right, thanks, Michael. Let's go to China, and very worrying or concerning news from there, particularly with regards to the outcome following the relaxed COVID rules. Beijing is said to have a widespread COVID situation there. We also see that in parts of China, stockpiling has become a challenge as there's been a rush for stocks in supermarkets. As I saw pictures of empty shelves there, reminiscent of the early days of COVID, when across the world, even things like toilet paper was scarce at supermarkets. What's the way forward? Do you think the Chinese government would rethink, or perhaps it's no going back on their relaxed laws on COVID?
I mean, from all the indications that we're seeing, it looks as though they're not in control of what's going on. And they certainly gave in from their zero COVID policy when they realized the social unrest was the worst since President Xi took power all those years ago. So I don't think they're in control of it. And as I said in my report, there are worries that the relaxation will cause a spread of COVID-19. I mean, it's one of those kind of things. There's no such thing as zero COVID. It will always be there in its different kinds of forms. It's a question of learning to live with it and learning to depress it as much as possible. And personal hygiene and hygiene in eating and hygiene in public places, is very, very important as far as that's concerned. And what's happened is that the Chinese have attempted to do all sorts of things to stop people moving around, to see that they do move around. They've got to say whether they've been in contact with people with COVID and so on. And the populace just doesn't like it. It's had enough. Thank you very much indeed. Had nearly 3 years of all this and really wants to get on. And that's being reflected very much in the way that the government is approaching it. I'm sort of with you. You cannot only go with the pictures, and the pictures suggest to me that they're not in control of what's happening.
Okay, very quickly. I mean, across the Atlantic on both sides, it looks like with regard to what you call orthodoxy, both the U.S. Central Bank and in the European zone, the position is the same about inflation, that they need to continue to rein in inflation, whatever it takes. But in England specifically, I'd like you to take us through what is likely to be the impact of the 50 basis points increase, the ninth consecutively, the highest in about 14 years, on mortgage, on small and medium-scale businesses, on Christmas, in fact, which is beginning to look really bad in the UK. And then, of course, whether indeed, as some people have argued, that this orthodoxy that we talk about with regard to how to rein in inflation is an attack on the working class. Do you think it is? Then second, Elon Musk. Elon Musk is making Twitter so volatile, so unpredictable, so unstable. He came in saying he will be a free speech absolutist. But now he's imposing sheer draconian measures, an attack on free speech. So why did he buy it in the first place if he was going to do exactly the same thing that he was condemning? Some journalists from CNN, New York Times have had their accounts suspended. The young man, the 20-year-old man in Jack Sweeney in Florida, who runs at Elon Jet, he too he has had his account suspended. And our free speech absolutist is now talking about safety and so much contradiction. And then, of course, there are women in Twitter who are going against him, saying that he's also gender insensitive. And finally, the U.S. now had a chance to go and check the books, the auditors' books of companies, Chinese companies, operating on the stock market in the U.S. Is that really a major breakthrough, or it is nothing we should take? Is something we should not take seriously?
So you're asking about interest rates in England. I presume you mean the UK by that, not England. You mean England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So the United Kingdom. Yes? Yeah. Okay. It'll be very difficult. I think shoppers are very wary. I think it'll be a very thin Christmas. And again, it may be that what was being said yesterday, and I'm not sure this is true, but the governor of the Bank of England was saying there was a suspicion that inflation might have peaked, given that inflation fell very, very slightly the day before yesterday, but only very, very slightly indeed. I think it's going to be very, very tough. I see no way forward. The thing is that when the demand for mortgages actually picks up again, as it surely will, because it always does, then I suspect rates will become more competitive. But until then, I think we're in for a very, very tough year. As far as Elon Musk is concerned, I cannot give any sensible answer to what he does. I mean, if you really want to know what's going on, I would shift your attention to Germany, where a court has said that it doesn't care whether Elon Musk or Twitter is actually responsible for the tweets on Twitter. The company itself must trace down the perpetrators of offensive tweets and actually deal with them. Now, this is really, really severe stuff. This is what the price of freedom of free speech is. You can have it if you want to, but you're going to come up against countries like Germany, Italy, France, maybe even the UK, certainly within the EU. It's not actually made up its mind as how it's going to regulate Twitter. And certainly the United States hasn't either. So as a hub of free speech, sounds great, but life isn't great. Life isn't like that, is it?
Okay. Well, you didn't want to comment on the US getting an opportunity to look at the books, the auditors' books of Chinese companies.
This is very difficult indeed as well, isn't it? This is another real problem that they've got. On the one hand, they're clamping down on the entity list. They're adding more Chinese companies which use AI and use and use semiconductors within that list. Number one. On the other hand, what they want to do is to actually have greater access. They want their inspectors to actually go to China to have a look at the way the companies that in the United States might be dealing with are going to be are actually made up, and they want to be able to audit them. Now, you can't have it both ways. I think these are the complications of the trade talks coming out. I thought what you were going to ask me was, how on earth is there any policy over all this? And my answer to that question is there isn't one. I mean, it's a question of, on the one hand, they want to cut down on China's ability to use semiconductors for their American semiconductors for their military use, but at the same time, the United States want to inspect the companies they might well not be dealing with. It gets very complicated, doesn't it? I have no answer to it.
Well, I mean, hypocrisy on all fronts, it would seem. Well, thank you very much, Michael Olsen. Now for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Udiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Doctor. Good morning, Ayo. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning to all our viewers. Yeah, we begin with the summit, U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit that has concluded. We talked about deals. The White House is saying that a total of $15 billion worth of deals have been signed. But again, it's across the continents. Project Africa, the project there to improve trade. Not sure why we're talking about inflation. Yeah, let's stick with the U.S. deals with Africa. So just sticking with that, $15 billion in total. There was the Project Africa deal, which is supposed to improve trade with the African continent. There was also the digital initiatives that we talked about. So this is coming essentially from the White House. So, what the individual countries each come back with is a different story. But in total, this is what the U.S. has said, in total, what has been signed over those last 3 days. So that's that. So now we move to inflation, and in Nigeria, figures that came out yesterday. So headline inflation, 21.47 as opposed to 21.09 year on year back in October. We moved to food inflation, the headline figure there. That's also climbed to 24.13. I think it was 23.17 or so in October. And then you've got core inflation. Not sure what the figure was back in October, but it was pretty close. Anyway, it's 18.24. This is when you remove the volatile items in there. Now, there is a question as to whether or not Nigeria's inflation figures are. As we know, Ghana is at 50%, right? And they are our neighbors, right? We trade and so on and so forth. There was a conversation that I had with Bismarck Rwane a few months ago when we talked about the accuracy of the inflation figures. We'll summarize what he said, but I just want you to take a listen to that conversation. An excerpt.
There are two things here. One, there's a question of data integrity, which Nigeria has not been known to be a unique example of integrity, not only in data, but in every other thing. So
yes.
we have our reputation, which lives ahead of us in so many respects. So that's one. Two is the fact that the inflation basket is supposed to be reconstituted every 5 years. Naturally, your behavioral patterns, your demography, in fact, your life expectancy and all of that.
Yeah.
So the last time changes over time. Therefore, you need to reflect that in terms of changing your consumer basket.
Okay.
Even if it's just tweaking it a little bit. But the last time we did that was 2009. So quite frankly, going by the 5-year cycle, we are due for a third review, but we haven't done anything about it. So what we sought to do at Financial Derivatives was to look at the basket as it was constituted in 2009 and try to rudimentarily just alter the basket. Crude alteration, but it's better than nothing. And when we use the basket, right, of the NBS, it came out at 18.6. By the way, our projection is that it's going to come out at 19 point something using that. But then when we try to reconstitute it, it showed about 45.64.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so big difference. That's one. Two, then we went further, because that's even using their own basket. We went further to do what we call a synthetic basket. The synthetic basket now tells us something much more frightening, which came out about 84%.
Good Lord.
But again, you're comparing the price of a product last year with the price of a product this year.
Right.
What is more important is that even using their own basket and using the monthly inflation, because if you're looking at the price of a bag of rice last month and this month is more reflective of reality.
All right, so again, just to summarize the issues with what we have right now, the basket as we know it's the inflation basket that aggregates the different price points needs to be reconstituted every 5 years. And the last time that was done was in 2009. Also, coming out to that interview, Mr. Rwane was saying that exchange rate has about a 70% impact, 70% of our inflation because of the fact that we are so import dependent. And you think about, fuels and so on and so forth, that also has to be taken into. So just to reiterate, the model that they ran using a reconstituted basket of the NBS's own numbers comes out to 47%. That is just their own scenario. Then when you that's their own basket. When you now use according to the synthetic basket he talked about, it comes out to 84%. Here's a tweet from Steve Hanke. He's a professor of applied economics at the Johns Hopkins University. Johns Hopkins, as we know, is who we use as a source for tracking COVID. And this was in early December. So when President Buhari first came into office, he promised to deliver economic growth in Nigeria. The only thing that's grown is inflation. And then he said in this week's inflation table, that was back on early December, takes the Nigeria 6th place. He has his own review. And he says we're at 51.2%. So, in addition to not having, 2-year-old unemployment data that is not updated, we really have to have a conversation with the Bureau of Statistics on reconstituting that basket and making it more reflective of where things are in terms of consumption patterns. And the fact that when you look at your rice, fuel, diesel is up 300% in a year. A bag of rice is up, triple digits. Is that correctly reflected? And I know it's a law of averages where they take surveys. So anyway, we round up with the Minister of Finance saying that debts owed to Nigeria amount to about 5.2 trillion naira. This was at a forum that took place, I believe it was in Minna. Just a couple quotes from her. She was represented by the head of special projects at the Ministry of Finance. Said the ministry, through the consolidation efforts of the debt analytics and reporting application, has been able to aggregate monumental debts of approximately 5.2 trillion. These debts came to the spotlight from data aggregated from over 5,000 debtors across 10 MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies. The debt aggregation effort is still ongoing. She continues and says that These debts are in the form of debt liabilities to the Federal Inland Revenue Service, refunds to the government by companies who fail to deliver on projects for which payments has been effected, unpaid credit facilities granted to both corporate entities and individuals by the Bank of Industry and Bank of Agriculture, judgment debts in favor of the government, debts owed to pension transition, and so on and so forth. If you got that much money hanging out there, I think there should be an effort done to correct
So real
it.
quickly, I think that's why the MBS should come out to Nigerians and let's know what the models
inflation, right?
they're using.
Yeah.
Because see, we need to be able to get the exact amount of inflation, not masking anything, so that we can plan and know how to inject solutions to solve the problem. And if Bismarck Rwanda says, and the financial derivative says that based on the MBS's modeling, they're getting 50%, all right? And based on also other modeling, they're getting over 80%, then can we have an average of models?
Right.
To be able to get a middle ground, to even know the exact amount of inflation. What does it feel like in the pockets of people? What's the astronomical cost? Because I was talking to somebody the other day, they were telling me something that cost them 500,000 naira, just the space of last year has gone up to about 1 million. So let us get the real numbers.
And that's a 100% increase.
That's
right?
a 100% increase. So let us get the real number. And this is not the time to mask any number. This is the time to be honest, with Nigerians. And also, for the life of me, we need to get those job unemployment numbers.
That's the killer. That one is the real killer.
It's been third quarter 2020.
Fourth quarter 2020. It's 2 years now.
So 2 years running. It is not good not to get unemployment numbers 2 years running. We need to get those numbers once and for all.
Good luck trying to get those numbers before an election. Right?
Huh?
Good luck trying to get job numbers right before an election. You know the opposition party will pounce on it and say that they haven't created. They promised 3 million jobs, right? They promised 3 million jobs.
Something, Rotus.
Yeah.
We must start to think beyond this opposition and position politics. See, politicians think of the next election. Leaders think of the next generation. It is time for us to start having leaders. If you are truly a leader, you will not think of just to win this election. You will think of how you can grow the next generation. Let's start thinking of the next generation. It is politics that has put us where we are in today.
Absolutely. Now, just speaking to that, and when you were giving the report, Rotus, my mind went back to the fact that the moment I saw the report, the first thing that came to my mind was, I hope the statistics are accurate. So you talking about your interview with Mr. Bismarck Rwanda just put paid to what, and it's quite unfortunate that there's such a lack of trust in figures coming from the National Bureau of Statistics, not founded, I must say, not founded, except of course in terms of the review of the basket. However, the danger of this is that if we don't have correct figures, how are we planning for the economy?
Right.
Is this what the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning is using for their policies or programs? If these are the figures being used, then obviously it will not achieve the desired impact. And obviously, perhaps that's why we're saying that we keep hearing no trader money, this intervention, yet it's not achieving the desired effect because we are not. The foundation in itself is faulty. Is not quite accurate. And this is why just to draw out the importance of having accurate figures and not running away from the reality of our economic prosperity or lack thereof. Then talking about the $15 billion investment. We said on a semi-light note when we were the first few days of the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit about a time where we're looking forward to a time when we would have Africa-U.S. Summit, where Africa will host the world since there's such an attention on the world. And it took me back to the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement area, and the fact, and it was, let me read a statement by the released by the U.S. following this summit. The AfCFTA, which would be the world's biggest free trade zone by area when it kicks into full gear in 2030. 1.3 billion people with a combined gross domestic product of $2.6 trillion. 1st of January 2023 will mark 2 years anniversary of the signing of the agreement. Unfortunately, we haven't seen the desired progress or effect that we thought we would in Africa. We often say that there's so much potential in Nigeria, but I would extend that to say as well that in Africa, we are losing a potential that the rest of the world are seeing.
Yeah.
Hence this race for coming and having, session, trying to come to have sessions with Africa.
Yeah.
We are not yet tapping the full potential. Out of 55 countries, only 45 have submitted a tariff proposal. We have not all countries have signed the agreement, have ratified, and this is 2 years afterwards. What is the problem? Why are we not leveraging this excellent, facility? So this is something for us to think about here in Africa.
Okay, what are the issues, in my view? Inflation is now 21.47%. But when you break it down further, in terms of states, you see that Ebonyi State is even much higher. Kogi State is even much higher. River State is 24.45%. When you look at urban inflation is much higher. When you look at rural inflation, it is much higher. When you look at food inflation is already 24.13%. So what we have is just the aggregate of 21.47%. Now these differences will be measured in terms of the erosion of purchasing power, the higher cost of goods and services in this environment. And I'm sure that everybody can attest to the fact of the rampaging epidemic of empty pockets and empty stomachs in Nigeria, and the higher cost of living. Now, you have raised the question about the accuracy of the figures. The Steve Anke that you referred to, the professor at JHU, if I said that a month ago, right? Yeah. So it wasn't in relation to November figures, which means that if Anke is right, whatever basket he is using to do his own measurement, different from what the National Bureau of Statistics is using, it could even be worse. Yeah. We may even be in a worse situation than Ghana that we talked about yesterday. However, it is important that at least we have some figures to work with.
Right.
Because once upon a time, that National Bureau of Statistics was not functioning. We had no figures. We were complaining in this country about planning without data.
Right.
But what we know are the basic issues. The fact that the cost of production is very high, that purchasing power is very poor, that we are an import-dependent country. These are basic facts, whatever percentage the economists want to talk about. Yeah. We also know that inflation is so real that the Central Bank of Nigeria has been trying to deal with it with a number of monetary policy issues. But those monetary policy issues did not work because of the increase in money supply within the economy and the distortions within the financial system. And that was why in October, the CBN came up with this redesign of the Naira policy and attempts to define withdrawal threshold, and all of that is starting today, and new notes.
Yes.
Okay, so if those policies have not worked, what is next? And that is why managing inflation is the major task ahead of whoever becomes president and his team in 2023. But I've also seen some comments by some concerned economists saying that tightening monetary policy further may not be the solution. And I'm quoting Muda Yusuf, who was reported in the papers today saying, look, there are other things we need to do. And in terms of other things we need to do, maybe we need to look, and I don't know what your opinion is, in the direction of some of the statements made yesterday by the new head of the World Bank, the economists, the country economists of the World Bank in Nigeria. And he was making specific recommendations. He said, for example, that Nigeria has to move away from central bank financing to get revenue. That's ways and means, which we have complained about on this program. He said subsidy has to go. Because with the subsidy regime jumping from 4 trillion to over 9 trillion, Nigeria cannot sustain it. And I know you are a subsidy...
I'm anti-subsidy.
You are against it. Okay. And then, of course, he said, we need to get, a unified exchange rate and all of those issues. So who is listening? These are political candidates. They're just fixated on empty promises rather than rigorous thinking about how to move Nigeria forward. And the worst people are those, vuvuzelas that they have employed who have neither brain nor sense. And who just spend half of the time abusing people.
And tagging us.
So I think we have to focus on the issues. And these are some of the serious issues that we have to focus on. How do we rescue this economy? Otherwise, we'll wake up next year and this inflation rate you are talking about will be over 80%. We'll be in a Sri Lanka situation.
Argentina.
Common sense is what the World Bank economists advise. Indeed. And there's a shortage of it right now in Nigeria.
Thank you so much.